To get this started, just a little bit about open learning, why we exist, and we started this goal of improving access to high quality education. Open learning is a complete one-stop solution for any education provider to build, host, launch, and run any successful online micro-credential or any education business. We work with universities, colleges, training companies, and governments from all around the world to enable them with the best in education technology for them to build high-quality programs. This event is part of our continuous effort in enabling cross-sector dialogues, specifically about micro-credentials across the lifelong learning and training ecosystems in Malaysia, as well as around the region. And to officiate this event, we're honored to have Dr. Khairul Salleh Muhammad Sahari, who's a Deputy Chief Executive Officer of MQA. He's responsible for a whole host of things, specifically within the quality assurance component, activities of the agency, which includes policy standard development, QA, assessor development, deployment, accreditation of higher education programs, providers in foreign country equivalency, and a whole host of things under his belt. Prior to his current post, he was also a professor at University Tenaga Nasional, holding the post of Assistant Vice Chancellor Academic. But also, he is an active assessor for accreditation of engineering programs under the Board of Engineers Malaysia, and is also a senior member of IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer. And also, he's one of the most important individuals, key individuals, paving the way for development of the micro-credential ecosystem in Malaysia. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Khairul Salleh to give the opening address for Open Learning Micro-Credential Week 2021.
Thank you, Sarveen, for the kind introduction. Thank you again, Sarveen, and thank you to Open Learning for inviting MQA to be part of your program. So congratulations to Open Learning for your successful implementation, and also for the Micro-Credential Week 2021. So I'm going to share a bit about what we have in MQA with regards to micro-credential, the current policies that we have actually crafted, and the way forward, and how Open Learning is also involved in this. As introduced, my name is Khairul. If you have any questions, and I will definitely love to answer them at the end of this session. Okay, so basically, in Malaysia, we have the most important thing about when we talk about micro-credential is how it is actually connected to the framework. And fortunately for Malaysia, for Okay, so so basically in Malaysia, we have MQA to be responsible of the quality assurance as well as the framework. So we are in charge of development and also monitoring, and also continuous monitoring of the framework. And our framework actually mentioned, we have the second version actually in 2017, that it caters and accommodates all forms of learning, including prior experiential learning as well as microcredits. So it is already embedded in our framework. Yeah. So I think this is very important. And also, if you refer to this slide here, the second part, the framework is also applicable in principle to the issuance of partial qualifications. So etc. Stackability, which allows multiple entry, multiple exit, and so on. So it already encompasses, and also we already foresee the importance of micro-credential since 2017. And this is where we actually develop policies related to micro-credentials in the country. And we have actually come up with two, what we call as the guidelines to good practices, micro-credentials. The first version was in 2019, and the second version was in 2020, which is a more comprehensive version of improvement of the 2019. And at the moment later, I will also share that we are also developing a new guidelines for micro-credential as part 2 of the GGP. Okay, so you can actually download this from our website. For our viewers, audience from maybe from Malaysia and also across the globe, you can actually refer to this website, our website, to actually download our GGP. Okay, so this is issued in 2020. So this is just a definition of what micro-credential is, a digital certification of assessed knowledge, skills and competencies in a specific area or field, which can be a component of accredited program. Okay, so we have two types of micro-credentials, unbundled, unpacked credentials from accredited program, or standalone micro-credentials, yeah, which is basically to support number one, we are supporting the Malaysian education blueprint, higher education. We have shift number 3 to actually, have lifelong learners in the country. So we are also supporting education from the so-called higher education, the skilling, reskilling, all the way up. Okay, and it's also used for professional, technical, academic, and professional development of the learners. So I think this is a very important definition in our GGP. And it has to be, when we talk about micro-credentials in Malaysia, what makes the course to be micro-credential, it has to be outcome-based, because in our MQF, we focused on outcome-based education. So even our micro-credentials have to be outcome-based, personalized, industry-driven, secure and shareable, and also transparent. Okay, so I think these are the principles of micro-credentials that you can also get from our GGP. And as mentioned earlier, so we have two types of micro-credentials, one from unbundling of accredited programs of higher education providers. We call it HEP. From MQ's perspective, we are not only in charge of quality assurance of institutions under the Ministry of Higher Education, but we are basically at large the entire nation. So regardless of who authorized bodies who offers programs, they have to academic programs of higher education, they have to come to MQA for accreditation. Okay, so these micro-credentials can be unbundled from these accredited programs. And there can also be standalone micro-credentials. So this is where the high potential is. I believe OpenLearning is also focusing on this part as well. Okay, and we are working very closely with a lot of stakeholders, because as mentioned, we have the phase 2 of the GGP, which actually focuses on the standalone micro-credentials, which I will share at the end of this presentation. Okay, and the general policy that we have, okay, the delivery of micro-credential can be in both conventional, open and distance, and hybrid method of delivery. And it's open to everyone, Malaysians and also non-Malaysians. And the most important thing about the naming has to be, it cannot be contradicting with the qualifications nomenclature, which is actually stipulated in our Malaysian Qualifications Framework, or MQF. Okay, and we can we are also proposing and suggesting to the providers to have what we call as the micro-credential statement, MQS, as part of the award of the credentials itself. So using that statement, okay, the learners who or those who actually acquired the credentials can actually use it for stacking the credentials to pursue studies and so on. Okay, so and then we also in the GGP, or the guidelines to good practices, we also actually addressed about the issue of about the micro-credentials in professional fields, in which, of course, it's subject to approval from the respective professional bodies. But looking at the current engagement with the professional bodies, it looks like it's very positive on their side, as at least as part of the continuous learning, as part of reskilling, at least. And some of the professional bodies are also accepting micro-credentials into their academic programs as well. So, of course, we will keep the learners update with regards to the acceptance from the respective professional bodies from time to time. Okay, and what kind of programs or my credentials that can actually be unbundled from accredited programs. Actually, we allow all types of programs except for foundation programs, as well as courses that requires thesis or dissertation. Yeah, but other than that, if it's coursework based, then it can actually be unbundled and offered as micro-credentials. This is when we talk about unbundling of programs or unpacking of programs from accredited programs. And what kind of accredited programs can be actually micro-credentialed or unbundled into micro-credentials? We have fully accredited programs. In Malaysia, we have two tiers of accreditation. First is the provisional accreditation, when institutions or providers initially want to start a new program, they need to seek a provisional accreditation. And in certain cases, when the provisional accreditation is granted, it comes with conditions or with conditions that has to be met normally prior to the offering of the program itself, or in certain cases as the program progresses. So in this case, if an institution or a provider wants to unbundle that program that has what we call as a provisional accreditation, then the institution has to ensure that all the conditions that was imposed when we actually allow for the program to be offered are actually complied and met first before it can be unbundled. Okay, for fully accredited programs, this is actually programs that has gone through a full cycle of the students has first cohort has graduated from the program, and we have actually go in and certify accredited the program. Then these programs are definitely ready for micro-credentials as well. Okay, and same of course the courses, and when you unbundle it to become micro-credentials, of course the content, when you stack up, it has to fulfill the requirement of the particular course or the program as well. Okay, so it cannot be different in terms of what has been actually provisioned or actually being accredited by MQA. So this is with regards to micro-credentials from accredited programs. Okay, and of course, it's totally up to the institution to unbundle whatever or offer whatever micro-credentials they feel has potential from their accredited programs. Okay, and then it is also in the policy that we allow micro-credentials to be actually franchised out from the accredited program owner. So, but of course, in order to do that, the micro-credentials must be delivered by the franchisor first before extending it to its franchisee, and we allow up to 70% of the content of the program to be actually franchised out, yeah, to a new partner. And in this case, we would require some sort of an agreement that has to be actually shown to MQA. Okay. So an MOA, an agreement has to be in place to ensure the accreditation requirement are complied with by the partners as well. So we allow a lot of flexibility when we talk about the accredited programs micro-credentials. We even allow 100% of unbundling, and also up to 70% of these can be actually franchised out. Of course, why we put in 70% is because beyond this, then it is actually as if you are franchising the entire program. So there's a different policy on that. So an institution can always franchise out their program, and of course, with you doing that, it is also subject to allowable, flexibility in offering these as micro-credentials as well. So that is a different policy, but of course, it also allows micro-credentials to be offered up to 100% through franchise mode as well. Okay, and entry requirements. This is the part which I believe is very much interesting, because as you know, we have entry requirements for academic programs in the country. I believe that is also the case for all the countries in the world. But when we look at micro-credentials, one of the main benefits is, number one, of course, learners do not need to fulfill the minimum entry requirement or equivalent to enroll into a micro-credential, because they are not enrolling into a program, but merely into a course. And of course, depending on the course, the provider can set their individual entry requirements. Yeah. And this is also to promote learning. For example, students nowadays, maybe some of them, they are not willing to shoulder, a lot of, for example, in order to cover the tuition fees for the duration of the study. So they are not willing to take loans and so on. So what they can actually do is they can do bits by bit, and they can actually register for credentials as and when they have the financial stability in order to do so. So they do not need to actually owe money to people, and they can actually accumulate these credentials as they progress in their career. So one thing that of course, when we talk about the entry requirements, it is not the entry requirement of the program. So as I mentioned earlier, the provider can actually set their respective requirements for the so-called micro-credential course. And what is also interesting is that, as I explained, learners can actually accumulate these credentials, these badges, and eventually they can stack up. And when they feel that they are ready to go to a full-fledged academic program, they can actually seek and obtain an award or qualification through the stacking of these micro-credentials. And in that case, since the learner has already gone through the credentials and he or she has proven that he or she can actually cope with the requirements of the credentials, of the respective micro-credentials, then there will be a different pathway for these so-called candidates to fulfill the entry requirements. So we have now another pathway for these learners through APEL. So at the moment, APEL, for your kind information, is the abbreviation for accreditation for prior experiential learning. This is where we actually acknowledge prior experiential learning of a learner, prior experience of learners through informal, non-formal learning, especially. So these learners can actually leverage on the existing policy on APEL A. APEL A is for access. So they can actually undergo the assessments for APEL A. Or we have a different route, which we are currently crafting and developing, which is APEL specific for micro-credentials. This is some sort of modified version of APEL A, which should actually take into consideration the amount of the credentials that the learners have stacked so far. So this is in a way exciting thing for the learners as well, because they can go through the credentials first and then come back to fulfill the entry requirement of a program. If they feel that they want to end up with an award of a qualification, then they can actually go through this APEL M. Yeah, and for this purpose, what is the key, important points here that I would like to highlight is that the learners can first stack up the credentials from one program, multiple programs. It doesn't matter, and the credentials can come from accredited program, or it can also come from standalone micro-credentials as well. But as long as, for example, a person is interested to eventually acquire a degree or a diploma from institution A, and looking at the requirements of that institution, so if the learner has fulfilled at least 30% of the requirements of the credit hours, then he or she can actually undertake this APEL M assessment. And this is also applicable if the learner can actually stack micro-credentials from several higher education providers, and they can actually go up to 70% before they actually take the APEL M assessment. And this is when we say that there is no age limit in terms of the entry to the micro-credentials, of course, in order to safeguard the entire integrity of the higher education space in the country. So we did put in the GGP some sort of a guidance in terms of the entry. And what is important is actually the age of the graduate. When the earliest that they can graduate, it's actually it cannot be earlier than the conventional route of learners through the conventional formal learning process. Okay, and this is what we are actually looking at in terms of the APEL-M entry requirement. Yeah, later on when we are developing this, and of course this is still a work in progress. And okay, of course, the important thing is this is a general guideline policy, but of course, in exceptional cases, the highest academic authority in the institution, for example, the Senate or the academic board, can actually decide on flexibility on a case-by-case basis. Okay, and this is actually how we talk about the nature of the micro-credentials as the components and of accredited programs and also standalone micro-credentials. Okay, so when we talk about the provider, okay, so we have credit completion. Sorry, let me try to understand this first. Okay, so if we focus on this the part here, yeah, if you're talking from the component of the accredited programs, if the learners is only taking micro-credentials from a single provider, and that is apparently is from unbundled or unpacked from an accredited programs, of course, all the courses are components are accredited, and regardless of how it is unpacked, as long as the learner takes 100% of the components of the unbundled components, then of course it will actually fulfill the requirement for the award of the degree eventually. Okay, but if you're talking about stacking of credentials for multiple higher education providers, but they are all from accredited programs only, of course, as long as it fulfills the requirement of the awarding body, because there must be only one awarding institution that awards the degree or the diploma at the end. Okay, so as long as it fulfills the requirement of credit transfer requirement policy, then it should be actually accepted by the institution. Of course, in that case, a maximum of 70% of the courses can be actually transferred. Yeah, meaning to say that the learner needs to only take a minimum of 30% of the content from the awarding institution. Yeah, so this is actually mentioned here. Okay, and the rest of the credentials can actually be accumulated from other institutions, as well. It can also be a blend, actually, from standalone micro-credentials as well. So this is the part on the far right here. Okay, so it can actually come from any body as long as it is accredited, and this is where the potential is, especially when we talk about reskilling later on, because we are talking about lifelong learning. Okay, and up to 30% of these credits at the moment can be transferred based on credit transfer for MOOCs and also APEL-C, which is a policy that we have with regards to credit transfer through prior experiential learning. Okay, but of course, looking at individuals, if they have vast potential and they have taken a lot more credentials, then they can actually leverage on the latest policy that we have, which is on APEL-Q. Yeah, this is APEL, the ultimate APEL for qualification, which I can, of course, you can also refer this to our guidelines of good practices in our website as well. Okay, and
hi, Prof. Just a little bit to everyone listening. Don't worry, we will be sharing this as well.
So we will share these slides. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
so just in the interest of time, if it's possible, I could just summarize the slide.
Okay. Okay. Sure. So I think I'm going to skip this part. So this is the so-called sample of the micro-credential statement that can actually be issued by the providers, okay, which can actually be of help to the learners. And this is where the diagram, which actually can showcase what I've explained about accumulation of the so-called micro-credentials from one or from multiple providers, as well as inclusion of the standalone micro-credentials as well. And this is what is important for us. And I believe when we work with OpenLearning later on, so this is on what is the important aspects that we will actually assess when we do accreditation for micro-credentials. So these are the 8 aspects or areas that we are looking. This is for from the provider's point of view. Okay, and then of course, all this when they fulfill, there will be this quality mark that we will actually issue as part of as a trusted brand of credentials. Okay, so this is something that before I end, okay, so this is something that can all read. Okay, an evolved 21st century education system will include interoperability between formal and non-formal learning. So I think this is very important. So everything is blended at the moment. And this is just some input on the number of credentials that we have registered with the agency at the moment. We have over 10,000 courses actually registered, include from all levels, from the certificate all the way to the doctorate level. Okay, and the way forward, this is something exciting that we're also working very closely with OpenLearning on guidelines to good practices on the standalone micro-credentials, which we will hopefully be able to publish next year, as well as the policy on the compliance to the entry requirement through the means of appel. Okay. And thank you, before I end, thank you to OpenLearning for the invitation to this event today. And of course, I would like to stress that OpenLearning is part of our partner and stakeholder in the upcoming development of our GGP Appel 2022. So with that, thank you very much. Back to you, Sarveen.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think there's so many things going on, I think, and you know, and MQA is covering a whole host of things, and to see 10,000 courses already registered, I think is a huge signal that a lot of things are moving in that sense. And with the introduction of Appel M, I think that's going to change a lot of things as well. You know, it's really exciting to see that you're working on so many different things, and I think it's absolutely essential, given the ecosystem of it all, to be able to give the learner the trust as well, and then giving the guidance towards the higher education providers to kind of have a guideline in terms of how to work that through. Again, thank you so much. Have a great day, and please do enjoy the rest of the show. There's so many different panels and especially workshops throughout the whole week, actually. So thank you so much again, and have a great day.